There's something deeply changing, maybe even revolutionary, about the time when a person finally decides they're finished, not in a lazy, angry way, but in a deeply aware and firm, decided way. That kind of moment is not about anger. It's not about revenge. It's about seeing things clearly. Empathy is often misunderstood in our world. It's typically shown as being soft, as a form of gentle giving in to the emotional needs of others. And while empathy does involve a deep ability to understand and feel with another person's feelings, that ability doesn't mean weakness. In fact, true empathy is one of the most powerful traits a human being can have because it takes guts, self-control, and strong self-knowledge. When we talk about empathy in the context of self-centered people, we're not talking about something on the surface. We're talking about someone who can feel deeply, someone who can understand, not just what another person is showing on the outside, but what they are really going through inside. A feeling person doesn't just hear words. They sense the real meaning. They notice patterns, feelings, reasons behind things. This is a form of mind reading that many mistake for being easily hurt emotionally, but it isn't being easily hurt. Not really. It's deep understanding. It's smarts wrapped up in kindness. Now, here's where the relationship becomes especially interesting. Narcissists, by their nature, are not interested in understanding each other. They are not working on the same feeling level. Their world is built around control, getting attention, and keeping their ego safe. To them, the feeling person is not a person. They're a tool, a mirror, something that gives back the approval the narcissist desperately wants. So when a feeling person enters their life, it seems like a perfect match. On the surface, the narcissist loves being admired, and the feeling person is naturally inclined to give support, to nurture, to understand. But under this relationship lies a dangerous imbalance. Empathy without limits leads to self-destruction, and that's where the difference lies. A feeling person who has not yet woken up to their own power, to their own right to say no, becomes easy prey for the narcissist's tricks. Their kindness gets used as a weapon against them. Their wish to help becomes a rope around their soul. They start to doubt themselves. They begin to take in the narcissist's story. You're too sensitive. You're making a big deal out of nothing. You're imagining things. This reality-bending talk breaks down the feeling person's sense of what is real. They try harder. They give more. They give up parts of themselves to keep the false idea of a bond alive. But here's the truth that changes everything. Empathy is only strong when it is aware, when it knows its own value, when it is no longer working on automatic, trying to earn love or fix the impossible. That is when empathy changes from passive sensitivity into active strength. It becomes selective, choosing carefully, done on purpose. And that's what makes it dangerous to the narcissist, because a self-aware feeling person begins to see through the narcissist's game. They stop reacting emotionally to every manipulation. They stop explaining themselves, proving their actions, defending their reality. They stop carrying the guilt that was never theirs. And most importantly, they stop trying to save someone who does not want to be saved. They realize that kindness does not mean being a victim, that love without respect is not love, it's being a slave. And they begin to turn that empathy inward toward themselves. That is the moment when everything changes, when empathy grows from just caring for others into having full control over oneself. And that shift is terrifying to the narcissist because the feeling person is no longer a predictable source of supply. They no longer calm the narcissist's hurts or confirm their overly big self-image. They become hard to read, calm, silent, distant. And in the narcissist's world, that's the ultimate threat, because the narcissist cannot control someone who is no longer emotionally tangled with them. Empathy at its best needs strength. It needs the strength to feel everything without losing yourself in the process, to see clearly without refusing to see the truth, to care deeply without giving up your limits. This kind of empathy is made strong by hard times. It's earned through pain. It doesn't come from being naive or passive. It comes from walking through the dark time of emotional harm and coming out the other side with your sense of self whole. Narcissists work from a deeply different psychological setup than most people understand. At their core, they are driven not by good sense or logic, but by emotional tricks and control. They make a world in which they are the center, the boss, and the victim all at once. To keep this false idea going, they must surround themselves with people who show back the image they want, people who approve of them all the time, people who obey emotionally. That's the base of their power. not truth, not reason, but obedience. And that obedience is about feelings, not thoughts. You cannot argue with a narcissist and win because the argument is never really about the subject right now. It's about control. It's about shifting blame, about twisting reality to keep their feeling of being better or being a victim. They don't talk things out to understand. They talk things out to overpower. They don't listen to hear. They listen to gather things they can use against you. In these relationships, logic doesn't matter. You can give the clearest facts, the most sensible explanations, and it will all be twisted, pushed away, or ignored because what the narcissist fears most is not your facts, it's your emotional freedom. This is why feeling people are so useful to them. A feeling person brings not only a deep connection with feelings, but also a willingness to see the best in others, to give the benefit of the doubt, to empathize even when it hurts. That is a gift in healthy relationships, but in a relationship with a narcissist, it becomes the very thing used against the feeling person. The narcissist notices this early on. They test it. They see how much the feeling person will put up with, how quickly they say sorry, how far they'll bend. And once they realize that emotional obedience is available, they use it fully. Over time, the feeling person is pulled into a cycle of emotional confusion. They find themselves defending actions they never did, saying sorry for reactions they never had, and questioning their own memories. They begin to doubt their instincts, their senses, even who they are. This breaking down of the self is not by chance. It is the narcissist's unspoken plan. The more emotionally shaky and unsure the feeling person becomes, the more power the narcissist has. It's not about logic. It never was. It's about keeping the feeling person emotionally tangled, always off balance. That's the key. Narcissists do not want to solve problems. They want to keep problems going, not openly, but secretly. They want just enough mess to keep the feeling person reacting, emotionally involved, and constantly trying to fix things. The more the feeling person invests emotionally, the more the narcissist feeds off of that energy, and the more they step up bad behaviors, reality bending, blaming others, shifting fault, the more the feeling person tries to understand, tries to soothe, tries to explain. But again, the narcissist isn't looking for understanding. They are looking for surrender. They're looking for control disguised as conversation. Many feeling people are smart, thoughtful, even highly self-aware. But smarts do not protect against emotional traps, because the trap isn't set in logic, it's set in emotional training. The narcissist trains the feeling person to connect peace with obeying, love with self-sacrifice, and connection with chaos. Over time, the feeling person starts to guess the narcissist's reactions. They change their words, their tone, even their behavior to avoid conflict. And in doing so, they slowly lose touch with their own emotional truth. The narcissist has won not by winning an argument, but by creating a world where the feeling person doubts their right to feel what they feel. This emotional dependence is exactly why narcissists can keep control even when their logic is clearly wrong. They don't have to be right. They just have to make the feeling person feel wrong. They don't have to tell the truth. They just have to make the feeling person feel guilty. The moment the feeling person accepts the role of emotional caretaker in a one-sided relationship, the narcissist has all the power they need because they're not relying on truth. They're relying on emotional reactions, on guilt, on hope, on fear. The only way to break this cycle is not through explanation, not through fighting, not even through proof. It's through emotional distance. Because when the feeling person no longer feels the need to prove, to explain, to please, the narcissist's tricks lose their hold. That is the point at which the game begins to fall apart. The narcissist cannot survive in an emotionally neutral setting. They cannot manipulate a person who is no longer reacting. They cannot rule someone who no longer takes on their chaos. Limits are often misunderstood, especially by those who have spent their lives putting the feelings and needs of others first. For a feeling person, the idea of setting a limit can at first feel like a betrayal of their core values: kindness, openness, and connection. But in reality, limits are not walls that keep people out. They are the lines that show where the self begins and ends. And for a feeling person, learning to draw those lines is the start of realizing their true power. In relationships with narcissists, limits are the first thing to be tested, pushed, and finally broken. Narcissists work through a sense of being owed things. They believe they are owed attention, approval, admiration, and control over how others see them. When a feeling person comes into the picture, they are often met with charm, affection, and a fake sense of emotional closeness. The narcissist quickly sees the feeling person's natural tendency to care deeply, to listen, and to avoid conflict. These traits are then used to slowly break down the feeling person's sense of personal space and identity. The slow wearing away of limits in this relationship is often hard to notice. It doesn't begin with clear mistreatment. It begins with small giveaways, ignoring a danger sign, excusing a mean comment, allowing a bit of disrespect because they're just having a bad day. The feeling person finds reasons for these moments because they believe in getting better, in second chances, in understanding the pain of others. But each giving in becomes a step away from the self. Over time, the feeling person finds themselves making excuses for the narcissist's behavior, putting the narcissist's moods first, and giving up their own needs to keep things calm. What makes this relationship so harmful is that it pretends to be love. The narcissist frames the feeling person's resistance as being selfish, their limits as being cruel, their independence as being a betrayal. They train the feeling person to feel guilty for standing up for themselves. They twist limits into rejection. This emotional turning upside down keeps the feeling person stuck in a cycle of self-doubt and trying too hard to make up for it. The more they try to reestablish themselves, the more resistance they meet. It becomes easier to give up than to fight for clarity. But waking up comes when the feeling person finally sees the price of this surrender, when the tiredness becomes too much, when the self-betrayal becomes too loud to ignore. The feeling person begins to question not only the narcissist, but the whole basis of the relationship. They begin to ask new questions. What do I need? What do I feel? What is no longer okay for me? These questions mark the beginning of change because they are the basis on which limits are built. Setting limits is not a reaction to the narcissist. It is a statement of self-worth. It's the moment the feeling person stops defining themselves by what they give and starts recognizing who they are. A limit is not about changing the narcissist's behavior. It's about choosing what you will no longer allow in your life. It's not about control. It's about clarity. Clarity about what helps you, what respects you, and what protects your peace. When a feeling person begins to set limits, the narcissist often reacts with great anger, confusion, or trickery. They are not used to being resisted. They're not used to hearing no. That word threatens their false idea of control. It messes up the emotional system they've created, where the feeling person gives endlessly and they take without question. A limit shows this imbalance. It forces the narcissist to face a reality they've spent their lives avoiding, that other people exist as separate, self-governing beings. This face-off is uncomfortable, and the narcissist will often increase their bad behavior to get control back. They may try to make the feeling person feel guilty, play the victim, or suddenly shift to showering them with false love in an attempt to bring back the old relationship. But once the feeling person has felt the strength of their own limits, something that cannot be undone happens. They begin to see the pattern. They start to trust their gut over the narcissist's story. They no longer feel responsible for another person's emotional state. And most importantly, they realize they are allowed to take up space, to have needs, to say no without explaining or apologizing. Limits are not just fences, they are statements of identity. They are the structure of self-respect. For the feeling person, they mean a huge change from seeking approval outside to inner rightness. They mark the change from emotional slavery to personal self-control. And while they may at first bring conflict, they finally bring clarity, peace, and freedom. Detachment is often misunderstood, especially by those who have been trained to connect love with sacrifice, attention with care, and being present with duty. For feeling people, detachment may at first feel cold or even mean. They are used to being emotionally available, constantly present, and deeply invested in the well-being of others. However, when faced with a narcissistic relationship, this emotional presence becomes a danger rather than a strength. In the hands of a narcissist, every emotional reaction becomes something to use for control. Every weakness is a chance for control. The more the feeling person reacts, the more power the narcissist holds. Narcissists do well in emotionally charged settings. They rely on confusion, instability, and intensity to keep control. The constant ups and downs they create keep the feeling person in a state of emotional survival, always trying to fix, soothe, or understand. They pull the feeling person into a mind game where the rules constantly change and the goals keep moving. It is not logic that traps the feeling person, but their own emotional investment. The more they care, the more tangled they become. The more they explain themselves, the deeper they sink. And all the while, the narcissist feeds on the attention, the apologies, the requests for clarity. In this situation, detachment becomes a powerful act of self-defense. It is not an act of not caring, but a decision to stop taking part in a system that is made to keep them emotionally trapped. Detachment is the refusal to take part in trickery, the refusal to be pulled into false stories or made-up problems. It is the moment when the feeling person stops reacting, stops defending, stops explaining, and this change ruins the narcissist's entire plan. Where once there was an argument, there is now silence. Where once there was justification, there is now stillness. The narcissist is no longer getting the emotional feedback they need to feel powerful and in control. They may escalate, provoke, or even beg to get that relationship back, but detachment is not easily undone once it is truly embraced. The feeling person no longer needs to win the argument, clear up the misunderstanding, or earn the narcissist's approval. They understand that there is nothing to prove and nothing to fix. The game only continues as long as they choose to play. Detachment also shows the emotional patterns that were previously hidden. From the outside, it becomes clear how easy to guess the narcissist's tactics really are. The cycles of love bombing, disrespect, and throwing away lose their mystery. The promises and apologies start to sound like memorized lines. The charm no longer feels real. And perhaps most powerfully, the feeling person realizes that they no longer need to figure out or explain the narcissist's behavior. They begin to understand that it is not their job to understand or carry someone else's dysfunction. This realization is deeply freeing. It allows the feeling person to take back their emotional energy and turn it inward. Instead of investing in someone else's healing, they begin to invest in their own. They set new limits, find forgotten interests, and reconnect with their inner voice. Detachment creates space for thought, for truth, and for clarity. It is in that space that the feeling person begins to feel a sense of peace they may not have known was possible. The narcissist, on the other hand, is shaken by this change. They are no longer the center of attention. They no longer have control over the feeling person's emotions. They may respond with rage, desperation, or even carefully planned charm to reestablish the connection. But the feeling person, now steady in detachment, sees through these efforts. They no longer feel the need to rescue, to absorb, or to engage. Their sense of self is no longer tied to the narcissist's approval or rejection. Detachment does not mean a lack of empathy. It means recognizing that empathy can exist without emotional entanglement. It is the awareness that you can care about someone without giving up your well-being. It is the understanding that love, if it demands the destruction of the self, is not love at all. For the feeling person, detachment is a return to emotional self-control. It is the process of stepping out of the narcissist's shadow and back into the light of their own truth. Healing is not just about moving forward, it's about taking back parts of yourself that were lost in the process of trying to love someone who could not or would not give back in a healthy way. For the feeling person who has lasted through a relationship with a narcissist, healing becomes a great act of change. It is the slow undoing of all the false beliefs that were put in place through manipulation, emotional harm, and mind control. It's the slow, difficult process of remembering who you were before your identity was shaped around another person's problems. Narcissists work through control, not just clear control like telling someone what to do, but sneaky, slow control that chips away at self-trust and independence. They rewrite reality through reality-bending talk, twist the story through blaming others, and reframe their meanness as your fault. Over time, the feeling person takes on these twisted views. They begin to question their own reasons, doubt their memory, and hide their feelings. They change to survive, often losing the ability to tell the difference between love and duty, kindness and obeying, compassion and emotional over-involvement. But when the feeling person steps away from the relationship, physically or emotionally, the healing process begins to shine a light on all that was hidden in plain view. Patterns that once seemed confusing start to make sense. The cycles of harm that were accepted begin to look horrible when looking back. The constant emotional exhaustion, the always being on edge, the endless guilt, it all starts to connect. The feeling person begins to see that the problem was never their love, but the lack of mutual respect and give and take. They realize that being emotionally generous in a one-sided relationship is not noble, it's self-destructive. Healing breaks the narcissist mind hold because it means a complete withdrawal from the game they were playing. The narcissist thrives on attention, emotional reactions, and the ability to influence how others feel and act. When the feeling person begins to heal, they stop providing that fuel. They stop answering the late-night messages, stop explaining themselves, stop seeking final words from someone who was never capable of giving it. They stop needing the narcissist to confirm their experience or admit the harm done. This shift is crushing to the narcissist because it messes up the illusion of control. They can no longer reach into the feeling person's emotional world and cause chaos. The feeling person is no longer available to be set off, manipulated, or guilt-tripped. And because narcissists rarely look inward, they often see this emotional unavailability as betrayal or punishment, never realizing that it is actually self-preservation. The feeling person is not playing hard to get. They are truly gone, emotionally and spiritually. As the feeling person heals, they begin to rebuild who they are. They learn to listen to their inner voice again. They practice saying no without guilt. They reclaim joy in being alone and having strength and limits. They start to form new connections, ones based on mutual respect and emotional safety. Their world becomes less about surviving and more about living. The hurts remain, but they no longer define the feeling person's sense of self. They serve as reminders of strength, not of failure. In this process, the feeling person also comes to understand that healing is not a straight line. There are times of clarity followed by times of sadness. There are days when the weight of the past feels too much and days when freedom feels great. But each step, no matter how small, is a move toward being whole. And with each step, the narcissist's influence fades. Their voice, once so loud in the feeling person's mind, begins to lose power. Their opinions no longer decide self-worth. Their approval no longer feels necessary. Healing also brings about a new level of choosing carefully. The feeling person becomes better able to recognize danger signs, to trust their gut feeling, and to walk away from relationships that feel familiar in unhealthy ways. They no longer mistake chaos for passion or manipulation for love. They learn to tell the difference between emotional availability and emotional dependency. They choose peace over intensity, clarity over confusion, and self-respect over temporary approval. This growth is irreversible. Once the feeling person sees the truth, they cannot unsee it. Once they taste the strength of self-trust, they cannot go back to abandoning themselves. The narcissist, who once held so much mental influence, becomes just another person with no power over their feelings or identity. Healing changes the feeling person from a source of supply into a self-governing being, someone who has taken back their independence, their voice in their life. There comes a moment in every feeling person's journey when the silence is more important than words, when the lack of reaction becomes the most powerful answer. That moment, the moment of walking away without explaining, without pleading, without one last talk, is the start of true freedom. For the narcissist, this silence is impossible to understand. They are used to chaos, to drama, to emotionally charged exits that leave the door open for coming back. They expect the feeling person to cry, to beg, to explain themselves one more time. But when the feeling person has truly had enough, there is no performance, no final scene, only a quiet exit that carries more weight than any fight ever could. Narcissists work within cycles, and those cycles are easy to predict. Love bomb, devalue, discard, hoover. This pattern is not random. It's planned. Each phase keeps the feeling person tangled up, hoping that this time it will be different, that this time they will be understood. The narcissist knows how to bait that hope, how to offer just enough approval to keep the feeling person emotionally invested. But once the feeling person wakes up to the cycle, once they stop hoping, stop trying, stop explaining, they break the loop. And nothing threatens the narcissist more than a loop that cannot close. Walking away is not just physical distance, it's emotional and mental separation. It's no longer needing final words, no longer analyzing the narcissist's behavior, no longer taking responsibility for their problems. It's not an act of bitterness, but of clarity. The feeling person has finally realized that nothing will change, that no apology will be sincere, that no explanation will ever make the abuse make sense. They stop seeking understanding from a person who was never interested in being understood, and in doing so, they reclaim their peace. This kind of departure hits differently. Narcissists do well on unfinished business. They like the door cracked open, a thread they can pull on later. But when the feeling person walks away cleanly, when they disengage entirely and without emotion, it sends a message the narcissist cannot manipulate. I see you, I understand, and I'm done. There's nothing left to argue about, no emotional advantage left to use. The narcissist who once did well on the feeling person's reactions now finds themselves standing in silence, powerless. The power in this moment does not come from revenge or feeling better than them. It comes from healing. The feeling person no longer walks away out of desperation or pain. They walk away because they've reconnected with their own worth. They no longer need to prove that they were mistreated, no longer need the narcissist to admit their pain. They understand that the narcissist's inability to love was never a reflection of their worth, but of the narcissist's limitation. And once this truth is fully felt, there is nothing left to say. This silence is not empty. It's full of firm decision. Every step away from the narcissist is a step toward freedom. And while the narcissist may try to provoke, to try to pull them back, to remind the feeling person of shared history or imagine loyalty, none of it lands anymore. The feeling person sees through the tricks. The guilt no longer works. The charm is no longer convincing. The manipulation once so powerful now looks clear and desperate, and what once felt like love is now clearly seen as control. The narcissist may spin stories, play the victim, or rally others to question the feeling person's character, but even that has no power when the feeling person no longer plays the game, when they walk away without responding, without defending themselves. They choose peace over what people think. They understand that no amount of proof will satisfy the narcissist's need to rule, and in refusing to participate in the performance, they end it, not with a dramatic curtain drop, but with the quiet strength of someone who knows their worth. To the outside world, it might seem sudden, but for the feeling person, this departure is the result of countless times of betrayal, of held-in pain, of ignored danger signs. It's the end point of years of inner conflict, of trying to make it work, of hoping for change. And when that final line is crossed, the decision is already made. There is no anger left, only certainty. This kind of silence is loud to the narcissist. It reflects a kind of power they do not understand. A power that does not yell, does not chase, does not beg. It simply leaves and never looks back. And in that exit, the feeling person is reborn. They are no longer the person who once put up with things, who once tolerated things, who once explained things. They are someone new, someone whole, someone free, someone who finally knows that walking away is not weakness, but the highest form of strength.